The black market was alive with noise and shadows. It was a hidden place, deep under the steel streets of the alien city, where the air smelled of oil, dust, and fear. Strange lights flickered from old machines, and voices spoke in dozens of alien tongues, all saying the same thing: buy, sell, and profit. Here, you could buy weapons, stolen tech, even living creatures. And tonight, there was one prize everyone wanted to see. A large iron cage was rolled onto the center platform, its wheels squealing inside. Curled up on the cold floor was a young alien girl. Her wrists and ankles were chained, her hair messy, and her clothes torn to rags. On her neck hung a metal tag with numbers stamped into it. Her weight, the crowd laughed and whispered, calling her a pleasure animal. To them, she was not a person. Not someone with a name or a soul, but something to be owned. The auctioneer, a fat, four-armed alien with a voice like grinding stone, shouted her description. Rare species, soft skin, exotic eyes, perfect for the high-paying buyers. He said, his mouth curling into a cruel smile. But one figure in the crowd did not laugh. He was human, standing at the back, wearing a dark coat with the hood pulled low. His name was Elias Kane, and he had walked into this market with only one reason. His eyes stayed fixed on the girl, not on her body like the others, but on her face. Her eyes were different. They were full of fear. Yes, but also something more. A spark of defiance. A silent voice saying she would rather die than be owned. Elias had seen that look before, in war, in prison camps, in people who refused to break, and he knew in that moment, he had to get her out. The auctioneer slammed his metal staff on the platform, starting bid. He shouted, hands went up across the room, aliens calling numbers in loud voices. The price rose quickly, but the bidders were already smirking, knowing she was just another toy to be passed around. Elias stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. Double the current bid, he said, calm but firm. The crowd turned to stare. A human bidding in this market was rare, dangerous even. Whispers spread like wildfire. Why would a human waste credits on damaged goods? One alien snorted. Maybe he's desperate, another laughed. The auctioneer grinned wide, sensing drama. Do I hear a higher bid? He called, but no one answered. Elias's offer was more than any of them wanted to pay for her. The gavel hit the metal stand, sold to the human. The auctioneer declared. Elias walked to the platform, the crowd parting slightly. The girl looked up at him as he approached, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. She had seen buyers before, and they were all the same: cruel, selfish, greedy. Why should this one be any different? When he reached the cage, Elias knelt down, his face still hidden by the hood. He unlocked the chains with a small tool from his coat, moving slowly so she wouldn't flinch. She didn't understand the words he spoke, but his tone was low and gentle. Then, to her surprise, he took off his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm, smelling faintly of smoke and rain. Her body stiffened, unsure if this was kindness or another trick. The moment was broken when three tall alien thugs stepped forward from the crowd. One had a jagged scar across his mouth. The other two wore metal armor plates. You know it's illegal to keep a pleasure animal human, the scarred one said, his voice dripping with threat. Sell her to us now, before you get hurt. Elias didn't look at them, his hand steady as he helped the girl to her feet. I'm not selling, he said simply. The thugs blocked his path. The crowd leaned in, waiting for a fight. But Elias only adjusted his grip on the girl's arm and stepped toward the exit. There was something in his movement, calm but ready, that made the thugs hesitate. They followed him with their eyes, muttering threats, but didn't attack. Not yet. As they walked through the narrow market corridors, the girl stumbled. Unused to walking after hours in chains, Elias slowed his pace, guiding her past stalls of glowing weapons and alien food she didn't recognize. She could feel the stares, hear the whispers. The human had stolen someone's prize. At the exit, The heavy metal doors opened to the cold night air of the city above. Neon lights flickered, rain drizzled, and far-off machines hummed like distant thunder. The girl shivered under his coat, unsure of what was waiting outside. But one thing was clear: she was no longer in the cage. For the first time in a long time, the chains on her wrists were gone, and the human's hand, though firm, didn't hurt. As they disappeared into the night, the scarred thug from before leaned against a stall, watching them go. His grin was slow and full of malice. "Let him take her," he told his partners. "He won't get far." The rain fell harder as Elias led the girl through the dark streets. The market's noise faded behind them, replaced by the hum of the city's upper levels. Tall alien buildings leaned over narrow roads, their neon signs glowing in strange colors. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of watching eyes. The girl kept glancing around, her steps uneven, her chains now hanging loose from her wrists, clinking softly. She had never walked beside a buyer before. Usually she was dragged, pulled like cargo, but this human. He walked with her, not ahead of her. Elias didn't speak much, only glancing back now and then to make sure she kept up. She still didn't know his name, didn't know why he had bought her. All she knew was that she had left the cage, but not the danger. Her heart beat fast. Because freedom in this city was an illusion. She knew the black market's rules. Nothing left without a price. And if you were stolen property, someone always came to take you back. They reached a narrow alley lit only by a flickering blue lamp. Elias stopped near a metal door and tapped a code into a small panel. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a dim room inside. The air smelled faintly of warm food and old wood, a strange, comforting scent in a city made of steel. "This is safe," Elias said quietly. Though he knew she didn't understand his language, she stepped inside slowly, her bare feet touching a rough carpet instead of cold concrete for the first time. In months, the room was small but clean. There was a single bed against one wall, a table with some tools, and shelves filled with strange objects she didn't recognize. Elias closed the door behind them, locking it with 2 heavy bolts. He pointed at the bed, gesturing for her to sit. She hesitated. In the market, a bed often meant things she didn't want to remember, but Elias didn't come closer. Instead, he walked to the small cooking unit and poured hot water into a bowl, adding dry herbs that released a soft, soothing smell. He placed the bowl on the table near her and set a spoon beside it. She stared at it suspiciously. Food from strangers had always been a trick before, a way to drug her or make her weak. Seeing her hesitation, Elias took the spoon, scooped some of the soup, and drank it himself. Then he nodded for her to try. Slowly she lifted the spoon, tasting a small bit. It was warm, soft and safe. Her stomach, empty for too long, responded with a quiet ache that made her eat more. Elias didn't watch her eat. He sat in the corner, removing his boots and checking the small device on his wrist. It beeped softly, showing a warning message. Someone had already posted a bounty. His picture, the girl's face. A price high enough to make half the city chase them. He turned the device off, hiding his concern. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. This was going to be a fight to keep her alive. When she finished eating, she curled up on the bed. Her eyes stayed on him, still suspicious. Elias pulled a blanket from a shelf and tossed it gently toward her. Then he took a seat on the floor, leaning against the wall. His coat still damp from the rain. The girl frowned, confused. Buyers never slept on the floor. It made her wonder if this human was not a buyer at all. But then, why had he paid for her? Why risk so much for someone like her? Outside, faint footsteps echoed in the alley. Elias's eyes opened instantly, his hand going to a small blaster hidden in his boot. He signaled for her to stay quiet. Through the small crack of the door, he saw 3 shadows move past. They paused, whispering in low alien voices. He caught a few words. Pleasure stock. Worth triple. Human buyer. They were looking for them, and they were close. The shadows moved on, But Elias knew they would return. He turned back. To the girl, speaking softly, "We can't stay long." She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Her chest tightened. She had run before, always been caught. If they left this place, she feared it would happen again. But something in the way he looked at her made her think this human was different. He didn't have the greedy eyes of a traitor or the cold stare of a guard. His gaze was steady, protective, as if he had already decided that she was his responsibility. Elias reached into his coat and pulled out a small metal disc. When he pressed it, a faint hologram appeared, a photo of two humans, a woman, and a little girl, both smiling. He pointed to himself, then to them. The alien girl tilted her head, realizing these were his family. His expression softened, but there was sadness in his eyes. The picture disappeared, and he put the disc away. She didn't know what had happened to them, but she knew loss when she saw it. For the first time, she whispered a single word in her own language, her name. Elias didn't understand the meaning, but he repeated the sound carefully. She nodded, and for a moment, there was something almost like trust in the air. But outside, the city didn't sleep. The bounty hunters were already spreading through the streets, and somewhere, the scarred alien from the market was making plans. Elias knew they had until morning before the first real attack came. He would use that time to prepare. Because now, this wasn't just about buying her. It was about keeping her, protecting her, and maybe giving her the life the market had tried to take away. Asterisk. The rain had stopped by the time the pale morning light crept through the small window. The girl lay on the bed, eyes half open, listening to the strange silence. It was not the silence of a cage or a locked cell. No clinking chains, no footsteps of guards. Only the faint hum of old machinery and the sound of the human breathing softly from the floor. He had stayed there all night, his coat rolled up under his head. She didn't understand why he didn't take the bed for himself. In her world, power was always used to take, never to give. Elias stirred, rubbing the sleep from his eyes when he saw her awake. He gave a small nod. He stood, stretching his back, and went to the cooking unit. Soon, the smell of warm bread filled the room. He placed a plate in front of her with bread and a small cup of steaming liquid. She looked at it with caution, but hunger won again. She broke the bread into small pieces, eating slowly while keeping her eyes on him. Elias didn't try to talk much. He knew she didn't understand his words yet. Instead, he pointed to objects around the room, saying their names slowly in his language. "Bed," he said. Pointing, she frowned, repeating the sound in a quiet voice. "Table." Again she tried, her voice uncertain. He smiled faintly, nodding in approval. She didn't know why, but it made her want to try again. Hours passed in this slow rhythm. Food, pointing, names. Her own language was never used here. But she listened carefully to the strange human words. Elias handed her a small piece of cloth and pointed at his own face. She understood he wanted her to clean herself. She hesitated, but then took the cloth and wiped the dirt from her skin. It felt strange to do it without someone ordering her harshly. In the afternoon, Elias worked at the table, taking apart a small black device. His hands moved quickly, rewiring circuits and adjusting parts. She watched him quietly, wondering if it was a weapon. He caught her staring and turned the device toward her. It was not a weapon. It was a small tracker, the kind slave traders used. He smashed it with a metal tool, breaking it into pieces. She realized then, he had found the tracker they hid on her and destroyed it. A small weight seemed to lift from her chest, even if danger still surrounded them. But safety was fragile in this city. Late in the day, the old cum screen on the wall crackled to life. An alien voice announced something in the local trade language. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was sharp, official. Elias turned the volume down quickly, his jaw tightening. It was a public notice, a warning about a stolen pleasure animal and the human who had taken her. Bounty hunters were promised triple pay if they returned her alive. Elias shut the screen off and began packing a small bag. The girls' stomach tightened. They were leaving again. Before they could go, there was a sudden knock at the door. 3 short taps, a pause, then 2 more. Elias froze, pulling out his small blaster. He motioned for her to stay behind the bed. The knock came again, this time louder. He stepped to the side of the door, hand ready, and called out. A voice answered, deep, alien, unfamiliar. Elias didn't open the door. Instead, he pressed a hidden button under the table, and a panel in the wall slid open. Inside was a narrow escape passage, barely wide enough for them to crawl through. He gestured for her to go first. She hesitated, but the sound of heavy boots outside the door pushed her forward. They crawled through the dark tunnel, the metal walls cold against their skin. The passage ended in another small room, dusty, unused, with a single window looking out to the rooftops. Elias pried the window open, helping her climb out. From the roof, they could see the street below. 4 armed aliens were pounding on the door they had just left. The girl's chest tightened, realizing they had been minutes from capture. Elias didn't waste time. He led her across the rooftops, moving quickly but quietly. The city stretched endlessly, glowing towers, steaming vents, and the distant hum of transport ships. The air was colder here, and she wrapped his coat tighter around her thin body. They stopped only when they reached another building with no lights. Elias picked the lock and led her inside. It was an old storage space, full of crates and dust. Not much, but it was shelter for the night. As they settled in, the girl sat on one of the crates, hugging her knees. She still didn't trust him fully, but something had shifted. He had destroyed her tracker, saved her from the hunters, and never once treated her like the market had. She touched the edge of the coat he had given her, feeling its weight and warmth. It wasn't freedom yet, but it was the first step. Elias sat across from her, checking his weapon and the small supply of food they had left. He glanced at her and then at the dusty ceiling. The hunters would be back, and the city was no longer safe. Soon, they would need to leave this world entirely, but for tonight, at least they had walls, a roof, and a few hours of rest. And in those hours, maybe, just maybe, the chains that had been on her for so long could begin to loosen inside her heart. Asterisk night fell heavy over the alien city. From the rooftop of the old storage building, Elias could see neon lights blinking far away, their glow fading in the mist. The streets below were quieter now, but he knew it was not safety. It was the calm before something worse. Hunters didn't give up, and the bounty on them was too high for greed to ignore. Inside, the girl sat on a crate, pulling the coat tighter around her shoulders. She had not spoken much since they arrived, only glancing at the window now and then. Elias sat by the wall, cleaning the blaster with steady hands. Every so often, he listened, really listened, to the sounds outside. A distant engine, soft footsteps on metal, a voice calling in the local trade tongue. The city was moving, searching, hunting. Hours passed, and the air grew colder. The girl shifted uncomfortably, her mind restless. At last she spoke a single word in her own language. Looking directly at him, he tilted his head, not understanding. She repeated it slowly, then touched her chest. Elias realized she was telling him her name. He repeated the sound, not perfectly, but close enough to make her nod. For a moment, the corner of her lips curved, the smallest shadow of a smile. That moment broke when a faint click echoed from somewhere below. Elias's body tensed instantly. He motioned for her to stay silent. Moving to the edge of the room, he crouched low, listening again. There it was, another click, metal against metal, followed by a muffled voice. They had been found. He pulled her gently from the crate and guided her toward the back of the room. The storage had no second exit this time, no hidden panel. That meant they would have to fight or run through the front. Before he could decide, the door shook under a hard kick. Dust fell from the hinges. The girl's breath quickened, her hands gripping the coat like it was the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Elias whispered something to her in his language. She didn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. "Stay behind me." The door burst open, and 3 hunters rushed in. One was the scarred alien from the market, his sharp grin stretching across his face. "Human," the scarred one said in a slow, taunting voice. "I told you. You wouldn't get far." Elias didn't answer. The first hunter lunged forward. Swinging a heavy metal rod, Elias stepped aside, grabbing the alien's arm and twisting hard, sending the weapon clattering to the floor. The girl backed into the corner, her eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. Another hunter raised a stun gun toward Elias. Before he could fire, Elias shot the blaster once, a clean, precise shot, hitting the weapon instead of the man. The spark lit the dark room. For a moment, the scarred alien didn't attack yet. He circled slowly, his eyes shifting between Elias and the girl. "She's worth more than you can imagine," he said. "You think you rescued her, but you just stole from the wrong people." Elias's jaw tightened. He wasn't going to debate with someone who saw her as a price tag. The fight broke out fast. Elias took down the second hunter with a quick strike to the ribs. The girl's eyes widened. She had never seen a human move like that. The third hunter lunged toward her instead of Elias, thinking she would be easy prey. But fear made her act. She grabbed the fallen metal rod and swung it wildly, hitting the hunter's leg. It didn't knock him down, but it gave Elias the moment he needed. One more shot from the blaster, and the hunter stumbled back, clutching his shoulder. The scarred alien's grin faded. He realized this wasn't going to be as easy as taking the cage from a market. "You can't run forever, human," he spat. Before signaling his men to fall back, they retreated quickly. But Elias knew they weren't giving up. They were just regrouping. The bounty would spread wider now, and soon every corner of the city would know their faces. When the door was clear, Elias turned to the girl. She was still gripping the rod tightly, her breathing fast. Slowly she lowered it, her hands trembling. He stepped closer, checking if she was hurt. She shook her head, but her eyes told another story. She was scared, but not broken. They didn't stay in the storage building. Elias packed what little they had and led her out into the night. The streets were slick with rain again, and steam rose from the vents. Underfoot, she followed him without question this time. She didn't know where they were going, but she knew one thing. If she stayed close to him, she had a chance. As they moved deeper into the shadows, she spoke softly. Her words were broken, but Elias caught the meaning. She told him about her capture, about being taken from her home. She didn't speak of every detail. Some memories were too heavy to bring to the surface, but he understood enough. She had been sold more than once, and each time the price on her had risen, not because of her beauty alone, but because of something else she never explained. Elias didn't press her for answers. He only said, "We'll keep moving," in his calm voice, because now the game had changed. The hunters weren't just after money. They knew she was valuable. Maybe in ways neither of them fully understood yet, and somewhere, deep inside her guarded heart, she felt it too. This was no longer about chains or cages. It was about surviving together, until the ones chasing them had no place left to run. Asterisk, the city's lights faded behind them, swallowed by the endless dark. Elias kept a steady pace, guiding the girl through narrow alleys until they reached the old cargo docks. The air here smelled of rust and salt. Though no sea existed, only a vast desert of pale sand stretching for miles beyond the city walls. This was the Wastes, a place even hunters feared. It was open, wild, and filled with things that could kill you faster than any blaster. The girl stood still, her eyes fixed on the tall metal gates ahead. Beyond them, the sand shifted under the fay wind like an ocean. She had heard stories of people who went into the Wastes and never came back. Elias glanced at her, his voice calm. "It's our only way," he said. Though she didn't understand the words, still, she could read the certainty in his eyes. With a quiet click, he unlocked a side passage in the gate. The wind hit them immediately, carrying fine grains of sand that stung the skin. She pulled his coat tighter around herself, lowering her head. Elias adjusted the strap of his pack and handed her a small cloth mask. She took it, confused. Until he tied his own around his face, she copied him, the cloth shielding her from the worst of the grit. They stepped into the wastes, leaving the last signs of the city behind. The ground was uneven, scattered with broken cargo containers and the skeletons of old machines. Above them, the sky was vast and black, lit only by the cold glow of distant stars. Every step made a soft crunch as the sand shifted under their feet. Elias moved carefully, scanning the horizon. He knew the wastes were home to more than just the wind. Scavengers, bandits, and alien predators made this place deadly. Hours passed and the city's glow was nothing but a faint memory. The girl's legs ached, but she didn't complain. She had learned long ago that complaining never brought mercy. Elias noticed her slowing and stopped beside a jagged rock formation. He pulled a small water canteen from his pack and handed it to her. She took it but hesitated. In the market, water was often laced with drugs. Elias drank first, then passed it to her again. This time she drank, the cool liquid easing the dryness in her throat. As they rested in the shadow of the rocks, a low rumble echoed across the sand. The girl tensed, clutching the coat tighter. Elias crouched, scanning the horizon until he saw them, 3 dark shapes moving low and fast. Sand skimmers, small hovercrafts used by waste raiders. Their engines were loud now, the sound growing sharper as they approached. Elias grabbed her hand, pulling her deeper into the rock formation. They crouched behind a boulder, the wind carrying the sharp hum of the skimmers right over them. The raiders didn't stop, their laughter fading into the distance. Only when the sound was gone did Elias stand, his eyes still watchful. They kept moving, taking a winding path through the rocks, before returning to the open sand. By the time the faint light of dawn touched the horizon, they had reached a half-buried structure, the wreck of an old cargo shuttle. Its metal frame was scorched and twisted, but parts of it still stood like the ribs of a giant beast. Elias led her inside, where the wind was quieter and the sand thinner. It was not a perfect shelter, but it would hide them from the sky. He checked the corners for danger before dropping his pack. The girl explored the space slowly, her bare feet brushing against scraps of metal. In the dim light, she saw strange symbols carved into one of the walls. They were not human, but something familiar. She traced them with her fingers, her lips moving silently as she read. Elias watched her closely. Sensing this meant something, she turned to him, speaking quickly in her own language, pointing at the symbols. He couldn't understand her words, but he recognized the change in her voice. It was no longer only fear, but a spark of recognition. She sank to the floor, touching a small emblem at the base of the wall. It was shaped like a crest, sharp lines surrounding a star. Elias knelt beside her. "This means something to you," he said softly, though she didn't know his words. She nodded slowly, placing her palm over the crest. In her mind, memories stirred. Stories from her childhood, whispered names of warriors who carried the same mark. This was not just a wreck, it was a fragment of her people's past. The moment was broken by a distant howl carried on the wind. It was not human, not even close. Elias's expression hardened. He motioned for her to stay close and began sealing off the open side of the shuttle with loose metal sheets. The howls grew louder, joined by the sound of many feet moving quickly over sand. Desert predators, pack hunters with claws sharp enough to slice through armor. Elias readied his blaster, keeping his body between her and the sound. They could see shapes now, pale against the sand, eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. The pack circled, their movements quick. Elias fired a warning shot into the air, the sound echoing across the dunes. Some of the creatures hesitated, but the hungriest pressed forward. The girl's heart pounded as she grabbed a length of metal from the floor, gripping it tightly. She wasn't going to be taken again, not by slavers, and not by beasts. Elias glanced at her, and in that moment, he saw something shift in her. Eyes, not just fear, but the will to fight. The first creature lunged, and Elias fired. The others scattered briefly, the sound of the shot mixing with their sharp cries. For several tense minutes, the predators tested the edges of the shuttle's walls before retreating into the dunes. When the last glow of their eyes disappeared, Elias lowered his weapon. Breathing out slowly, the girl loosened her grip on the metal bar, her hands trembling. For a moment, the only sound was the wind. Elias looked at her and nodded once, a silent acknowledgement that she had faced danger and stood her ground. The desert was not safe, but it had given them something. Out here, far from the chains and the market, they were not buyer and property. They were two people fighting to stay alive, and in the wastes, survival could turn strangers into something more. The wrecked cargo shuttle groaned softly in the wind. Morning light spilled through cracks in its twisted walls, painting lines of gold across the sand-covered floor. Elias sat against one of the bulkheads, his blaster resting on his lap. He hadn't slept much. His mind was busy watching for predators, listening for hunters, and thinking about the girl. She was sitting a few meters away, tracing her fingers over the strange crest carved into the wall. Her eyes were distant, as if looking at something far beyond the desert. Elias finally spoke. Even though he knew she wouldn't understand all of it, that symbol, it means something to you. She turned toward him, then back to the wall. With slow, careful movements, she began drawing shapes in the sand with her finger. First the crest, then a set of lines that looked like stars and circles. Her voice was quiet, speaking in her own language, but Elias could hear the weight in every word. He didn't need a translator to know she was telling him a story. She pointed at herself, then at the crest. Elias frowned, his mind piecing it together. "You're from them," he murmured. Not them as in a random alien group, but them, a people whose names still made powerful leaders tense. He remembered old war briefings, vague rumors of a warrior bloodline species that had vanished after a civil war. They had skills, technology, and influence that could change the balance of entire sectors. If she was one of them, it explained why the market kept her hidden as pleasure stock. Her true value was worth far more than any illegal sale. The girl noticed the change in his expression. She touched the crest again, then mimed something with her hands. Two sides fighting, one falling, one standing. Her voice trembled when she spoke her next words. Elias couldn't understand, but he could guess. Her people had been broken, scattered, maybe hunted. She was not just a captive. She was a survivor of something much larger. He leaned closer, keeping his voice low. "If they find out who you really are, they won't just want to sell you." She didn't need to understand the words. The tone was enough. Her eyes flickered with the same defiance he had seen at the auction. But there was also fear, not for herself alone, but for something bigger. Elias stood and walked to the back of the shuttle. Searching through old crates, he found a dusty emergency pack and pulled out a thin, folded sheet, an old navigation map. It was faded, but a few locations were still marked. When he unfolded it, the girl froze, her eyes locking onto one of the symbols printed in the corner. She reached out, tapping it again and again, saying a word he had never heard. E4, her voice was urgent. Elias studied the map. The mark she pointed at was deep in uncharted territory, far from the trade routes. If this was her home, or what was left of it, then taking her there would be dangerous before he could think further. A sharp sound broke the moment, the whine of an engine in the distance. Elias's eyes narrowed. It wasn't the deep rumble of a desert predator or the soft glide of sand skimmers. This was heavier, faster, built for hunting. The girl looked to him, sensing the danger without needing words. He quickly folded the map and slipped it into his coat. They moved to one of the shuttle's broken windows. Peering out, on the horizon, dust was rising, a speck of metal growing larger with every second. Through the glare of the sun, Elias could make out the shape of a desert raider craft. Its weapons were mounted, its speed too fast to be anything but a pursuit. "They found us," he muttered. The girl's grip tightened on the piece of metal she had kept from the last fight. She wasn't going back in chains, not again, Elias thought fast, scanning the wreck. There was no time to run across open sand. The craft would overtake them, but maybe they could make the wreck itself their shield. He guided her to a narrow space between two walls, where the shadow was deep. He set his blaster to a lower power, enough to disable, not kill, if they had to capture instead of destroy. The craft roared closer, sand whipping into the air as it slowed to circle the wreck. Shouts echoed from inside the raider ship. Harsh voices calling for them to come out. The girl shook her head. Pressing herself deeper into the shadows, Elias crouched low, waiting for the right moment. When one of the raiders stepped inside the wreck, Elias struck fast, a quick shot. A shove, and the man was down before he could cry out. The second one rushed in, but was met with the girl swinging her metal bar. It connected with a loud crack, sending him stumbling into Elias's reach. In seconds, the inside of the wreck was silent again except for the wind. But outside, the ship's engines were still running. They couldn't stay here. Elias grabbed the girl's hand and led her through a back opening in the shuttle. The heat outside hit them instantly. They ran low across the dunes, using the curve of the sand to hide their movement. The girl glanced back once, the wreck, now a shrinking shadow behind them, and felt a strange pull in her chest. That crest, those walls, they were a link to her past, and now they were leaving it behind again. By the time they slowed, the raider craft was nothing but a faint hum far away. Elias finally stopped, letting her catch her breath. He pulled the folded map from his coat and pointed at the symbol she had chosen earlier. "We go there," he said firmly. She didn't know the words, but she nodded, because for the first time since her capture, there was a destination in her mind, not just escape, not just running, home, asterisk. The journey across the wastes had turned into a test of endurance. Each day was hotter than the last, each night colder than the one before. The girl walked beside Elias without complaint, her eyes fixed on the horizon. Somewhere ahead lay the symbol on the map, her home, her people, or whatever was left of them. But the desert was not empty. Sometimes she caught glimpses of movement far behind them, small dots on the sand that grew and vanished like mirages. Elias saw them too, and each time his hand went to the blaster at his hip. On the fourth day, the dunes began to change. The sand became firmer, scattered with jagged black rocks in the distance. Towers of stone rose from the desert floor, their sharp peaks cutting into the sky. The girl slowed, her breath catching. She knew this place. It wasn't the city of her childhood, but it was close. A marker of territory, the edge of a land outsiders rarely entered. They climbed between the stone towers until they found a narrow path leading into a canyon. The air here felt different, cooler, with the faint scent of water. For the first time in days, the girl's shoulders loosened, but the relief didn't last. From the canyon walls above, the echo of engines reached them. Elias cursed under his breath. The hunters had followed them into the heart of the desert. The sound grew louder until the scarred alien's voice cut through the air. "Human, give her up, and maybe I let you live." The girl stiffened, her fingers gripping Elias's coat. Elias looked at her once, then stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're not taking her." The scarred alien laughed, his ship lowering into view at the canyon's edge. "You don't even know what she is," he sneered. "She's worth more than any world you've seen." Elias raised his blaster, but before he could fire, the girl stepped forward. Her voice rang out in her own language, sharp, commanding. The hunters hesitated, exchanging uneasy glances. Then, from deeper in the canyon, another voice answered hers. Low, firm, and filled with authority. Figures began to emerge from the shadows. Tall warriors clad in armor marked with the same crest Elias had seen in the wreck. They carried long, curved weapons and moved with precise discipline. The girl's eyes filled with a mix of relief and fire. Her people had found them. The scarred alien snarled. realizing too late that the hunters were now trapped between the human and the warriors. A standoff hung in the air, the only sound the wind rushing through the stone walls. Then everything exploded into motion. Elias fired. First, taking down one of the hunters, the warriors leapt from the canyon walls, their weapons slicing through the air. The girl didn't run this time. She grabbed a fallen blaster and fired alongside them. Her aim wasn't perfect, but her resolve was unshakable. The battle was short but fierce when it ended. The scarred alien was on his knees, a warrior's blade at his throat. He glared at Elias, spitting words neither of them cared to hear. The warriors dragged him away, leaving the canyon silent once more. Elias turned to find the girl standing tall, her chest rising and falling with each breath. For the first time, she looked not like someone running from chains, but like someone ready to lead. One of the armored warriors approached Elias, speaking in broken human tongue. "You bring her back. You save Bloodline." Elias glanced at the girl. She was watching him, her eyes softer now. He nodded once. She saved herself. They led them deeper into the canyon until it opened into a hidden valley. There, a settlement of stone buildings and banners marked the last stronghold of her people. Children ran through the streets, and elders stood watching from high balconies. When the girl entered, a hush fell over the crowd. Whispers spread quickly. Her name, her crest, her return. An elder stepped forward, laying a hand on her shoulder. Then he looked at Elias and gave a slow, respectful nod. That night, the settlement held a feast. Fires lit the valley, and music echoed against the stone. Elias sat at the edge, not wanting to take the focus away from her, but she sought him out, sitting beside him with a small plate of food. In halting human words, she said, "You stay?" Elias studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "If you want me to." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she took a piece of cloth and tied it around his arm. The same crest as on the walls. It was her answer. He wasn't just the man who freed her from the black market anymore. He was part of her people now. As the fires burned low, Elias looked out at the valley. The hunt was over. The chains were gone. And in their place was something stronger: trust, respect, and the start of a future neither of them had imagined when they first saw each other across a cage.